At my weakest, they read my name, not in celebration, but like an obituary. But I was still breathing, still fighting, still alive. Have you ever felt like your absence would be more convenient for others than your presence? Like the weight of your silence gave them a strange comfort, and your voice became too inconvenient for their lies? That was me. I watched as people I once called friends whispered my name behind closed doors. Some mourned me emotionally long before I was ever gone. They assumed I'd given up, that I'd surrendered, that I wouldn't rise from what they thought was my end. But they were wrong. It didn't begin with pain. It began with trust. The kind of trust that makes you take down your walls and let people see who you really are. I had dreams, wild, untamed, unfiltered. I shared them. I had wounds, raw, invisible, sacred. I showed them. And one by one, they used it all against me. Imagine this. You're walking into a room full of people you once laughed with, sat beside, broke bread with, and yet now, every pair of eyes turns away. Every smile is strained. Every silence is louder than a scream. That's not just isolation. That's betrayal wearing perfume and pretending it's loyalty. I wasn't broken by a stranger's sword. No, I was wounded by familiar hands. By the very ones I used to pray for. When I was at my lowest, they didn't reach out. They reached conclusions. She won't come back from this. He's done. They're too damaged. They carved tombstones with their words while I was still fighting for breath. They sent flowers of pity while my spirit raged to survive. And still, I stayed alive.
Why?
Because I wasn't born for their approval. I was born for a purpose. Because something divine inside me refused to dim just because they closed their eyes. You see, it's easy to stand when everyone's clapping. But it's sacred when you rise and no one even notices. That's where the real warriors are forged, in silence, in shadows, in sorrow, in the moment when the world reads your name like a farewell. But God reads it as a beginning. There's a fire that starts when you hit rock bottom. Not the fire of anger, no. That's too temporary. This one is deeper. It's the fire of realization, of clarity, of finally seeing who's for you and who's just around you. And when that fire ignites, something changes. You stop chasing validation. You stop shrinking to fit into places that were never designed for your spirit. You stop explaining yourself to people who never really wanted to understand you in the first place. You become unapologetically alive. That's what happened to me. They didn't see the fight left in me because they stopped looking the moment I fell.
But the fall wasn't the end.
It was the preparation. Because you never realize how strong your soul is until weak becomes your only option. So yes, at my weakest, they read my name.
But I was still alive.
And that was enough to rewrite everything they thought they knew about me. My name is not important, not because it lacks meaning, but because what matters is what it has survived. You see, I wasn't born strong. I wasn't born into ease, luxury, or the kind of peace that cradles you into comfort. I was born into storms, subtle at first, like raindrops tapping on the windowpane, then violent and consuming. From the very beginning, life made it clear I would have to fight for every breath, every moment of joy, every thread of hope. My earliest memories weren't of lullabies or warm embraces. They were of quiet tears behind closed doors, of learning to pretend everything was okay just so others wouldn't ask questions. I learned quickly that survival sometimes looks like smiling in public and breaking in private. I had a family, but even within those walls, I often felt like a stranger. My father, distant, not unloving, but emotionally unreachable. A man weighed down by his own burdens, too tired to notice the silent cries of his child. My mother, delicate but resilient. She carried pain in her bones but still cooked every meal with a strange kind of grace that only women who've known suffering can understand. Her silence taught me strength. Her endurance taught me patience. Then there were the outsiders who called themselves friends. They laughed with me in daylight, but mocked me in the shadows. They celebrated my highs but vanished at my lows. To them, I was only useful when I had something to offer, my time, my energy, my loyalty. But the moment I needed the same, there was silence. There was her, 2, my best friend. Or so I thought. The one who held my secrets like sacred stones until she dropped them into the wrong hands. She knew everything about me, my dreams, my fears, my hidden wounds. But in the end, she traded my truth for attention. Her betrayal didn't just break trust, it cracked my entire sense of discernment. If someone like her could turn, then who was safe? And yet, despite it all, I kept showing up.
To life.
To people. To love. Because deep inside, there was this flicker, a divine whisper that refused to die. It kept telling me, you are more than what they've done to you. In school, I was the quiet observer. The one who stayed late to help others but went home alone. The one who gave everything in group projects but was left off the thank you list. At work, I showed up early, left late, and carried the load of many, all while receiving half the credit. Supervisors smiled when I over-delivered, but none defended me when I broke down. People admired my strength, but they didn't question what it cost me. They saw the light in me, but not the hours I spent in darkness to keep it burning. And when things got hard, truly gut-wrenchingly hard, they started pulling away one by one. I remember the turning point so clearly. It wasn't one event, but a slow accumulation of disappointments. There was the day I lost a job opportunity because someone I trusted lied behind my back. The day my closest cousin exposed private things I'd shared in confidence. The day I showed up crying and someone told me to just get over it. They didn't see the battles I was fighting. They didn't know the nights I spent awake, wrestling with God, asking, why me? But God heard. And slowly, gently, he started showing me the truth. The people I thought were my support were only seasonal scaffolding. Temporary. Necessary for a stage, but not meant for my foundation. I started seeing the pattern. I gave and gave, but the moment I needed, I was made to feel like a burden. And that awareness didn't make me bitter. It made me aware. Aware of the difference between company and connection. Aware of how some people only stay close when you're useful. Aware of how others will sit at your table only to steal your recipe. But most of all, I became aware of myself. I saw that I was stronger than I ever believed. I realized that even though I was surrounded by people, I'd been walking this road mostly alone, and still standing. The truth is, I used to crave belonging. I used to shrink to fit into spaces that didn't value my full height. I made myself quiet to make others comfortable. I watered myself down to avoid being too much. But the day I almost gave up, the day they read my name like I had already left, something sacred woke up inside me. I remembered who I was before the world taught me to forget. I remembered the child who used to dream freely. The teenager who journaled hope even after being crushed. The adult who still believed in goodness, despite being surrounded by greed and gossip. I remembered me. Not the version others labeled. Not the caricature they painted with half-truths and twisted stories.
But the real me.
The one who kept going when there was no applause. The one who prayed when all doors closed. The one who still chose love, even when hate was easier. That's the me they underestimated. That's the me who is still alive. And that's the me who is about to rise. It began slowly, like a crack in a glass window you don't notice until it spreads wide enough to shatter everything. One day, I was surrounded by people who claimed to love me. The next, I was reduced to whispers, rumors, and silence. It wasn't a dramatic betrayal, not at first. It was a slow disappearance. Messages left on read. Plans canceled last minute. Invitations stopped coming. At first, I thought it was just life. People get busy.
People drift.
But then came the moments that couldn't be ignored. The birthday they all forgot, though I had planned and shown up for each of theirs. The promotion party I wasn't invited to, even though I had helped write the speech for the one who was being celebrated. The group chat that suddenly had a new version when I wasn't in. And then the real cut. Hearing my name in a conversation I was never meant to hear. Words meant to bury, not bless. They spoke as if I no longer existed. As if I were already gone. She used to be strong, but something changed. She's just not the same. That's when it hit me. They had written my story before it was over. They had read my name like it belonged on a gravestone, not a victory banner. They thought weakness meant I was finished, that a moment of silence meant the song was over. But God wasn't done. I began noticing more. The sarcasm hidden behind smiles. The passive comments disguised as concern. "You look tired," they'd say. Or, "You've lost your spark." Not out of love, but out of quiet satisfaction, because some people feed off your struggle. It validates their own brokenness. Even at work, it crept in. Colleagues started undermining me in meetings. Ideas I had nurtured were passed off as someone else's. I was spoken over, silenced, and sidelined. The same people who once praised me now looked through me like I was invisible. And then came the breaking point. One afternoon, I received an anonymous message. It was short, but devastating. "You were never as loved as you thought. We all just pitied you." At first, I froze. Then I crumbled. My hands shook. My chest tightened. It felt like the world had gone quiet, but inside me was a storm of voices, echoing old doubts, replaying old wounds. Everything I feared was being confirmed. That I was alone. That I was replaceable. That all my giving meant nothing in the end. I didn't leave my room for 2 days. I ignored calls. Skipped meals. I sat in silence, hoping it would drown out the screaming inside. I cried until I couldn't. I slept just to escape. I asked God why people break others just because they can. Why, God? I whispered into my pillow, tears soaking the fabric. Why do they hate me for loving them? No answer came immediately. Just silence. But sometimes silence isn't absence. Sometimes it's a test. And slowly the shift began. One morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't see a victim. I saw someone who had been through hell and was still breathing. Someone who had been misjudged, misused, misunderstood, but not mistaken. I began writing again. I picked up the pieces of my confidence and glued them with grace. And when I returned, back to the world, back to the spaces that had broken me, I noticed something different. They weren't used to my strength. They weren't prepared for my silence. You see, people get uncomfortable when the one they thought they could break walks in glowing, not groaning. They wanted me to beg. They wanted me to need them. But I didn't. I started saying no. I stopped explaining myself. I unfollowed the pages and people who only watched my life like spectators in a boxing match, cheering when I fell, silent when I stood. And that's when the real war began. When you stop bleeding for those who cut you, they call you heartless. When you heal in private and come back with peace, they call you fake. When you stop answering their chaos with energy, they call you distant. But I didn't care anymore. Because for the first time, I wasn't living for their applause. I was living for my alignment. I lost some people. Correction. I lost the illusion of people. Because real ones don't vanish when you're weak. Real ones don't love you less when you have less to give. Real ones don't discuss your pain like gossip or label your silence as failure. But even knowing that didn't make the road easy. There were moments of doubt, of loneliness,
Of second-guessing.
old habits whispered. Maybe you were too much. Maybe it was your fault. But then I remembered something that shifted everything. I was allowed to be tired. I was allowed to feel weak. I was allowed to fall and not be finished. The world has conditioned us to perform constantly, to be on all the time, to never show a crack. But God doesn't demand perfection. He only asks for truth. And in my truth, I found him. In the broken nights, in the unanswered messages, in the betrayals, he was there. In the quiet strength of my mother, I saw his grace. In the way I rose again after each fall, I saw his hand. Even in the pain, I began to recognize purpose. Each lie they spoke only made me hunger for truth. Each rejection pushed me closer to divine protection. Each silence from others allowed me to hear the voice of the one who never left. And now, when they speak my name, it's no longer in pity. It's in surprise. Because I was supposed to break. I was supposed to disappear. I was supposed to lose. But I didn't. I lived. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, intentionally. I redefined what it meant to be alive. I stopped waiting for others to validate my worth. I stopped performing for people who never clapped. I stopped shrinking for spaces that could never hold my truth. Now I walk differently. Not out of arrogance, but alignment. Not with revenge, but with revelation. They read my name like it was past tense. But I am very much present. More alive than ever. It was a cloudy Thursday afternoon when the moment I never expected arrived. The very people who once looked through me, who talked about me in hushed tones when I was down, who thought my silence meant surrender, they were the ones who now watched me rise with wide eyes and nervous hearts. Not because I came back with vengeance, but because I came back with vision. I remember walking into that room, the one where I had once felt like a shadow of myself. Same room, same people, but a very different version of me. And it wasn't loud confidence that made them shift in their seats. It was the quiet authority that surrounded me. A strength not rooted in shouting, but in stillness. In knowing. In being. I didn't have to prove anything anymore. My presence was enough. One by one, the masks began to drop. The girl who once laughed the loudest behind my back couldn't hold my gaze. The guy who used to undermine my voice in meetings started quoting my ideas. And the one who sent that anonymous message? Well, God has a funny way of revealing what was hidden. They showed up in my inbox. Not to gloat, but to apologize. I didn't think you'd make it. I didn't realize how strong you were. I was wrong about you. I stared at the message, and I felt nothing. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just peace. Because I no longer needed them to see me. I saw myself. Still, I didn't reply. Some chapters deserve to be closed with silence. And that became my power. See, life has a divine rhythm. What breaks you today may become the reason you bloom tomorrow. And the same hands that tried to bury you might live long enough to witness your blossoming. That's what happened to me. My pain didn't just build endurance. It built purpose. I started creating from the parts of me they tried to destroy. The stories they twisted, I rewrote. The dreams they laughed at, I began to chase with urgency. I turned my wounds into wisdom, my loneliness into leadership, my setbacks into sanctuaries of healing for others who are walking the same dark path I once did. I remember one night in particular. I had just spoken at a women's retreat. I was nervous the whole time, sharing my rawest truths, the betrayal, the depression, the long nights I wanted to disappear. And after the session, a woman came to me, eyes red with tears. She said, I was ready to give up. But hearing you reminded me that survival is still a form of worship. That hit me deep. It wasn't just about me anymore. My comeback wasn't just mine, it was a message. That you can be overlooked, forgotten, slandered, betrayed, doubted, and still rise. You can lose your spark for a moment without losing your fire forever. You can cry yourself to sleep and still wake up chosen. You can be shattered and still shine. Because God's not done until He gets the glory. And that became the shift in my spirit. I stopped trying to prove people wrong and started proving God right. He said I was worthy. He said I was enough. He said I was fearfully and wonderfully made. He said, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. And while the weapons were formed, they didn't prosper. Because something in me had been divinely preserved. Not by my own doing, but by grace. There were moments I didn't have strength to stand, but somehow I kept going. There were days when my smile was fake, but the hope was real, even if it was buried beneath the tears. And now, I walk freely. I don't explain my past. I don't apologize for my scars. They're my proof that healing is possible, that God restores, that ashes can become beauty when placed in the hands of the Creator. But let me be honest. The climax wasn't a single moment. It was layered. There was the day I forgave, not just others but myself. For staying too long. For hoping too hard. For ignoring the red flags because I didn't want to lose love. Forgiveness was the final unlock. It didn't mean I forgot. It meant I refused to let bitterness rot the garden God was growing in me. And then came the restoration. Relationships I thought were lost forever came back, some in unexpected ways. My voice grew louder, not in volume, but in value. Opportunities one never applied for began landing at my feet. People started seeking me, not out of pity, but out of purpose. Even those who once turned away began to say, "There's something different about you."
And they were right.
Because I was different. Not harder. Not colder. Just clearer. Clear about who I am. Clear about who God is. Clear about what I will and won't accept. And that clarity is what changed the trajectory of my life. I started creating boundaries, not to shut people out, but to protect the healing I fought for. I began to say yes to things that aligned with my spirit and no to things that only drained it. I embraced seasons of solitude without fear. Because now I knew, alone doesn't mean abandoned. It means chosen. Handpicked by God for a process that requires isolation. Sometimes God has to pull you away from the crowd so He can pour into you directly. And when you come back, people won't recognize you. They'll wonder how you survived what should have destroyed you. They'll wonder how your light shines so brightly after the darkness you walked through. And they'll say things like, "You've changed."
Yes, I have.
"I've healed." And I've learned that healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like turning off your phone and talking to God. Sometimes it looks like crying in your car and then walking into work like nothing happened. Sometimes it looks like walking away from people you once thought you couldn't live without. But healing is holy. And so is the comeback. The moment everything comes full circle. The moment the people who counted you out see you being counted on. The moment you realize you never needed them to believe in you. You only needed to believe in yourself. And trust that God was writing a better story all along. That story is still being written. But today I stand here. Not as someone untouched by pain, but as someone transformed by it. Someone who is written off, but never erased. Someone whose name was whispered in gossip rooms, but is now spoken in prayer rooms. Someone who went from buried to blooming. Someone who is weak, but still alive. And that's the twist, isn't it? They thought the weakness was the end. But it was only the beginning. Because sometimes your breaking is the birthplace of your becoming. So if you're reading this right now, and you're in the middle of your own unraveling, if you feel like the world has forgotten you, if the people you trusted the most have betrayed your heart, if your name has become a conversation in rooms you don't enter anymore, remember this. You're still alive. That means the pen is still in God's hand. That means the story is still being written. That means the ending will not be what they predicted. It will be what He promised. And that promise? It's resurrection. It's beauty for ashes. It's restoration for devastation. It's strength in the place of weakness.
So hold on.
Because they may have read your name like it was over. But heaven is still writing your name in bold letters. Not as forgotten, but favored. Not as fallen, but rising. Not as weak, but powerful. Because you, my beloved, were never meant to be buried. You were meant to bloom. And bloom you will. Beloved soul, if anything in this message echoed in your spirit, then this part is especially for you. You are not reading this by accident. You are not listening because you stumbled here. You were led. Heaven orchestrated this moment as a reminder, not just of who you are, but whose you are. And now, the divine hand that preserved you in your lowest is calling you to rise again. Not just for survival, but for purpose. This is your moment to choose. Will you stay buried under what they said about you? Or will you rise into what God already declared over you? They may have tried to reduce you to a rumor, but God is expanding you into a revelation. So here's what I want you to do. Lift your head, even if it's heavy with sorrow. Straighten your back, even if it's been bowed in battle. Speak your name out loud, even if it trembles in your throat. Because the same God who spoke light into the darkness is now speaking life over you. No more shrinking. No more silence. No more dimming your brilliance just to make others comfortable. You don't owe them an explanation. You owe God your obedience. And that means stepping boldly into the next chapter. Even if your voice shakes, even if your knees wobble, even if you have to walk alone. Because what's ahead is greater than what's behind. Yes, they read your name at your weakest. But heaven is about to announce your name in power. Not because you are perfect, but because you are chosen. So breathe in, beloved. Stand tall. And walk like someone who has survived the fire. Because you didn't just survive it.
You were refined by it.
Now go forth. Shine with the glory that comes from scars healed by grace. And let your story remind the world. God's not done. He's just getting started.